another track with the Thermofax. There are scads of uses for the Thermofax. One of the ones that's really fast and really simple is to use a bleach product to discharge dark fabric. Now, before you do that, just like jumping right in, you got to know a couple things. First of all, not all dark fabric discharges, and the definition of discharge is the removal of color, as opposed to like dyeing, for example, where you're adding color. So when we're discharging, we have to have a product that actually destroys the dye and makes it go away, and you have already experienced some version of this if you've ever splashed bleach on clothing where it didn't belong and you ended up with a stain where the color went out, like on denim, for example. So one of the first things that you would want to do if you were planning to follow through with what I'm going to do right now would be to test your fabric. And the way to test your fabric is to put a little bit of the product that you're planning to use on the fabric, and you see that's what should happen. You won't always get this color. Fabrics discharge in very odd, sort of oddball ways. You never quite know what's going to happen unless you're using the same fabric over and over. Most of the time it won't go back to white. And when this is finished later, I'll remind you, you want to rinse this out, because as long as the bleach product is in the fabric, it can do damage later. So first you make sure you've got a fabric that will discharge, and what you're finding out simultaneously is whether the product that you're using will actually discharge the fabric. Theoretically, anything that has bleach in it will work, but I have found that sometimes when I buy these products, there are dishwashing detergents, there are cleaning products like this one, there are toilet bowl cleaners that have Clorox or some version of bleach in them. Theoretically, those should all work, but if you buy it at the dollar store, oddly enough, sometimes the expiration date has passed, and if the expiration date has passed, the product might not bleach anymore. So you want to do your test. You're testing for your fabric and you're testing for the product. Once you've got the green light, go ahead, we can proceed with this, then it's pretty straightforward. I've got my Thermofax screen, and it can be any design, and I'm going to put it down on the fabric. Let me move this over a little bit this way so it's centered. I put the screen down on the fabric, and if you get a screen from us, it's always marked front or top, and that's the side that should be up, because the Thermofax has, I talk about this in the really basic video. The Thermofax is basically a polyester film that is bonded to plastic. And the screen will be, the lifetime of the screen will be preserved if that plastic side always goes down, so you're not constantly degrading it with the squeegee. So I'm going to put the plastic side down, and my point there was if you're making your own screens, you might want to develop the best practice of marking them so you know which side to put down. Now, there's always a perfect tool for the job, and this little squeegee is the perfect tool for the Thermofax printing job. You may have on hand, or you may see a squeegee like this one. This is a fabulous squeegee. It's one of my all-time favorites. It's pretty worn. It might even be vintage by now. But it's the wrong squeegee because it's too big and heavy, and it's not a good mix for the Thermofax screen. So you can acquire one of these various places, including on my own website, or you can use a credit card, or you can use any tool that has a fairly stiff blade. Okay, got it. Now, this Thermofax is inside a plastic frame, and it's been taped, and I want to be sure to put the Clorox product that I'm using up here on the tape, not directly on the screen, because here's what happens if I put the Clorox product right on the screen. See that blotch at the top? That's because the product bled down onto the screen before I was ready to print. Now this is kind of an organic pattern anyhow, and it's a sample, so I could tear that off, but there is a way to avoid having that happen, and the way to avoid having that happen is to put the product on the tape, not on the screen. Okay, it doesn't take much. Then I'm going to use the squeegee, and I want to keep it perpendicular, pull it across the surface. I don't want to bend it, angle it too much, because if I angle it, then I'm forcing more product through, and that can make the image bleed or be like overprinted. So I keep it straight, I pull it across the screen a couple of times, Then I lift it up. Now, this particular product won't dry in the screen and ruin the screen. Long term, if the bleach was left on the screen, it would be a problem because it would degrade the surface. But I'm not in the rush that I would be in to hurry and wash this. That would be true if this was a paint or if it was a product that dries and then is permanent, which is mainly a fabric paint or an acrylic paint issue. It's not my issue right now, so that means I can just lay this out of the way over here while I'm waiting for this design to come up. So you can see it develops a little bit slowly, but it's kind of fun. I mean, you know, we're not doing time-lapse photography here, but it would be interesting to push it in that way. Now, I will point out that right here, the screen didn't print, and when I look at the other print that I made, it did print, so I know that's not a problem on the screen itself. That's operator failure. And that means that I ran out of product by the time I got down here. So when I screened, the product was coming out on both sides, but it wasn't coming out in the middle. If I took the screen clean, I could align it and I could patch that if I wanted to. But the way to really deal with it best is to be sure you've got enough of whatever the product is across the top so that when you pull it down, you can get a complete print. It's pretty. This is one of my all-time favorite prints. Now, I have a couple of choices. I can wash this out right now, and if I do, the irregularity of the coloring will stay that way. So if I like it, I'll run over to the sink and wash it right now. If I want it to develop as far as it can go, which would be true of the sample that I printed before we started filming, see how much lighter it is? So that's what will happen if I let this piece sit for a while. Eventually it will go as light as the coloring you see here. But it is true with these products that this will reach a point where it will stop and it won't change anymore. And that's related to dye chemistry, and we're using all different kinds of fabrics, so I can't give you a 100% true explanation of why it stops and doesn't go all the way to white. I just know from experience that it rarely does. So either way, these will now need to be washed, and they need to be washed out in some cold water, not necessarily some soap, but you want to make sure you wash them really thoroughly, because if you don't and there's bleach residue left in the fabric, it will degrade the fabric and cause little holes later down the road, which might not be too big a deal if you were making something that was arty, but if you were making fabric like this and you wanted to use it for a garment, you sure would want to get all the bleach rinsed out so that you wouldn't have little pinholes in your garment later. Pretty straightforward. You wash the Thermofax, dry it out, you're good to go. You can use it with paint or dye next time, and that's the beauty of the screens. As long as you keep them clean and you handle them with respect, you'll be able to get thousands of prints from one single screen.